Welcome to the course. In this course we're going to be learning how to texture in Substance Painter. We're going to be starting from the very basics and going up to an advanced level. And we're going to be doing that by first off taking a look at the basics of Substance Painter. After taking a look at the basics, we're going to go ahead and texture our first asset, which is going to be this leather belt. Now this course is beginner friendly, as we're going to go over everything and we're going to go very slow and structured. And at the end of the video you will have seen the complete workflow of creating these textures, and you can apply it to your own models. And this video will only be part of the full course. Don't worry, we're going to completely texture the whole leather belt and you will learn all the basics. But in case you do want to learn more and how to texture more complicated assets and more complicated materials, I will be linking the full course in the description down below, or you can click the link in the video that's gonna pop up over here. And this is also gonna contain all the model files, so you can follow along with the same model. And that also applies to the leather belt. You will have the model, so you can follow along one by one with the course. And this will be an ongoing course, meaning that the more time goes by, the more chapters will be added to the course, meaning that you will learn more and more complicated workflows. And by signing up to the course platform, you'll be directly supporting my channel, allowing me to keep making these videos. And the videos on the course platform will be subtitled in multiple languages. You will see the languages on the screen right now. So yeah, without further ado, enjoy the course. So when you open the software, it's gonna look a little bit like this. You can hit close, and then we go to file. Gonna open sample. I'm gonna be opening the preview sphere sample. So let's go ahead and familiarize ourselves a little bit more with the UI. And on a note, if your UI looks different, you can go to Window and hit Reset UI. This will reset it to the default. So over here we have our viewport. Over here we have our 2D viewport, where we can see our texture in a 2D format. To switch between these two, we can hit F1, actually F2 to go to the 3D viewport. Then we hit F3 to go to the 2D. Then we hit F3 to go to the 2D one. And if we hit F1, we can show both. Most of the times you're going to be working with just the 3D viewport, as that's really all that you need. So F2. Let's go ahead and make this UI look a little bit less complicated. So on the right we have the texture set list. We can just left mouse click the name, and then we can drag it anywhere in the UI. Just gonna drop it into the layers. Then we're gonna do the same for the properties fill. We're gonna change the position of this to be over here. And then lastly, I want to take the assets. I'm just gonna move them down here. So let's talk a little bit about navigation. If we hold down Alt, middle mouse click, we can pan the view. If we hold down Alt, left mouse click, we can rotate the view. Now finally we have Alt, right click mouse to zoom in the view. So you're practically always holding down Alt and just switching between the mouse clicks to navigate. Then we also have F to focus the view. This is gonna center your object in the viewport. So let's get started with some actual texturing. So over here, a texture set list, we can change that to layer. You can drag this out a little bit by left mouse clicking, get some more space. And everything that you will do in Painter is gonna be on a layer. Let's start off by just selecting layer 1 and we're gonna say delete, the delete key, delete. We're gonna delete everything that was in our layer stack. That's gonna leave us with a blank material. So there's two types of layers. We have the normal layer. On this layer we can paint things. If we go to properties, paint, and we scroll down a little bit, we can change the color of that paint. And just like that. This layer you're gonna be using a lot less than the next layer I'm gonna show, which is the layer that you're gonna be working with most of the time, which is a fill layer. So what this layer does, it fills the whole mesh, everything with the base values. So over here our color is set to gray. If we change this to red, everything is gonna become red. If we adjust the roughness, it's gonna become more shiny or less shiny. We up the metallic to 1, now our surface is metallic. If we up the shine on this, we have a nice shiny metallic material. We're gonna be talking more about roughness and metallic later on. Now let's focus on just the layers. So a good practice in Substance Paint is to always name your layers. For example, fill layer 1, you can double click this and call this red metal. Now we can create a new fill layer, which is called blue. Let's just go by blue and give this a blue color. So we cannot see the red metal anymore, because the blue is on top of the red metal. So whichever layer is on top is the one that's gonna be shown. So let's say if we take the red metal and we put that one on top, now it's gonna show that instead of the blue. And we can create as many layers as we would like. We can keep rearranging them whenever we want. So let's go ahead and delete all our layers. Again, we can shift, left mouse click, the last one to select everything in between our selection. We're gonna say delete. Let's take a proper view at what channels we have. And a channel refers to one of the properties of the material. So we have a color channel, a height channel, roughness channel, metallic channel, normal channel, normal channel. We can ignore this and we can ignore this for now. So let's start off by creating a red color. We can go here, we can make this red. And anytime you want to see a channel, we can go from the material channel, we can go to the base color channel, which is the color channel. Now we're going to see just that texture. If I hit F3, we can see our 2D texture. And since we just have a single color, just going to be a single flat color. I'm going to hit F2 to go back to our 3D. And we can hit M to go back to material. So we can also hit the C key to go to a channel view. And if we hit C again, it's going to show the next channel, the height. The height channel is going to be used for adding some height to a material. To quickly demonstrate this, let's go ahead and click filter by path. This is going to be useful. You should always have this on your side. We can go to starter assets, materials. Actually, we need to unclick this materials because we want to use a map. Let's say in the height we take anything. We take this thingy. We can take it with the left mouse and drop it in our height slot. Now you can see we can add some detail to that. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next channel. Again, we can go to material and height. And we can take a look at that channel. Whichever part is white is going to be pushed up, and if it's black, it's not going to be pushed up. So if we take a look at this white line, if we go M for material, you can see it will get height on that. It's not real height, it's just the light reflecting to it. For now, let's go to roughness. But like I showed you earlier, white is going to be very rough material. And if we make it all black, it's going to be super shiny. Again, we can go here, we can put roughness, and you can see that texture. Now let's go with something in the middle, it doesn't really matter. And then the last channel that we're going to be worrying about is metallic. This channel is used to tell a material, hey, am I a metal material or am I not a metal material? We put it to 1, our material is metallic. We put it to 0, it's not metallic. This channel is a little bit special, as you usually only want to stick to values of 0 and 1. So generally speaking, there's some exceptions. You wouldn't be using a value of 0.7, for example, or like this. Either the material is metal or it's not metal. And let's go ahead and delete this layer. So I'm going to create 2 new fill layers. Let's call this one blue. We can hit Ctrl D to duplicate our layer. I'm going to call this one red. And let's do one more. Let's call this green. Let's make the green one green, the red one red. And again, it's not going to be shown in red because we have the green one on top. If we hide the green layer by hitting this eye icon, it won't be shown. We can see that the red is right there. Let's make this one blue. And again, you won't be able to see it until we hide that. Now, of course, this is not very practical that we can only have one layer visible. So the way that you can mix and match layers is by masking. Let's say we take the green layer. I'm gonna right click on the layer and we can say add white mask or a black mask. If we add a white mask, you will see we can still see the green layer. If we add a black mask, it will disappear. If we alt click on the mask icon right here, we can preview our mask. If we make this white, alt click it, you can see that we have a white mask. So whatever part is white on the mask, it's gonna show. So whatever part is white here in this layer is gonna be green on our model. Whatever is black, it's not gonna be seen. So if we go ahead and paint on this mask, you can see that we can start to erase where it's green. We can start to actually do some stuff with our layers. So as you can see here, we have a black square that's being hidden. We paint a circle with it, you'll see that this circle becomes red, because that's the first layer underneath it. So if we hide the red, it's going to turn into blue. Let's go ahead and do a black mask. This is gonna have everything disappear. Also, to change the color of your mask that you're painting, you go here to the grayscale. You can put it to whichever color you want. Or you can use the short key the hotkey X to switch from black to white. Let's go ahead and paint outer ring with a white color. Not the best looking mask, but you get the idea. Then I'm pressing X to erase. Now we have a green ring. Now let's do the same for the red layer. This time I only want to make this one blue. But since I want to have the majority shown instead of hidden, I'm going to add a white mask. And then with a black color, we're going to be painting that trim around it. Again, if you mess up, we can use a white color. We can start to say, okay, over here we want to see the layer. And at any time, if we want to change a color, let's say instead of blue, we want to have pink. We can just go to the base color and we can adjust the color anytime we want. We can do this for everything. This is going to be a principle that you're going to use all the time, is creating layers and then masking those layers. So be sure to get comfortable doing so. If you didn't quite understand everything that I've shown you, feel free to go back. I also want to show you one more thing. We're not limited to black and white. We can also use gray values. So if we put our grayscale, for example, to 0.5, you will see when we paint now, the effect is going to be less strong than when we put that full white at 1, at full black, I mean at 0. And if we put something like 0.8, it's going to be very, very subtle. So the more dark, the more hidden the layer is. And if we use a lighter gray, we'll see that it will only pop through a little bit. So let's go ahead and delete this. I'm going to be creating a new fill layer. Let's make this one yellow. Add a little bit less shine to it by putting down the roughness. I'm going to be creating a new fill layer. Let's make this one black. Right click, add black mask, because we want to hide most of the black. Then we're going to be painting a little smiley face. Because now you should be understanding the basics of Substance Painter. So the last thing I want to show you is how can we save our work. All that you have to do is go File, Save As. Now we can put it anywhere, and let's call this, for example, Smiley. So now I can do whatever I want. Just mess this up. Now if we go File, Open, or we can say Recent Files, we can open that file up. We can say Discard. It was just saying you have unchanged save. You have unsaved changes. So discard. And you will see that we're back at where we saved. So let's go ahead and create our very first real project. So we go File, New. Over here you have a bunch of settings for our project. First off, let's go ahead and cover the templates. So these are a bunch of painted templates that you can use. Generally speaking, you can pretty much ignore all of these and just put it to The first one, PBR metallic roughness. If you're planning to make textures that are going to be used in Unity or Unreal Engine, it can be a good idea to put them on the Unity or Unreal Engine template. We're going to be covering in a later video what exactly templates are. For now, just put it on the PBR metallic roughness template. Then in File, we're going to need to choose the model that we're going to texture. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. So I'm going to be using the cylinder model. You can find this model underneath the video is a download link to the cylinder model, so you can work alongside with it. Then the document resolution, it refers to the texture size. So if we put this at 512, for example, we're going to create an image. The image is our texture with a width and height of 512 pixels. The higher the number, the more resolution you're gonna have in your texture. For now, let's keep this at 248. Normal map format. I like to put this to OpenGL. Don't worry too much about this. Gonna keep this checked on. We're not gonna be using UDIMs. We're gonna cover this in a later video as well. We can go ahead and uncheck import cameras and auto unwrap. We're gonna ignore baked maps for now. We're gonna ignore all the other stuff and we're gonna say OK. Now we just created our painter project. So I'm gonna go ahead and reorganize my UI a little bit. I'm gonna drag the texture set list to layers, properties, paint, the left. Let's go ahead and drag our assets down. And then we can hit F2 to go full screen on the 3D viewport. Now let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the texture set list. So this sounds a little complicated, but all it means is that since we have one texture set right now, we're gonna be using one texture for this model. We could be using multiple textures for one model. And then over here, you could be switching between the texture sets. So switching between the texture that you want to work on. In this case, all that we need to worry about is double clicking this and we can rename our texture. So let's call this cylinder. We can also go ahead and change the size of this texture at any time that we want. So now let's get to actually texturing. So we go to layers. Let's also drag this one to the front. Let's go ahead and delete layer 1. We're going to be taking a look at smart materials. So again, we can click over here, filter by path, to get some more options. Then over here we can switch between what we want to see of our content browser. So right now we're looking at materials. We can look at smart materials, smart masks, and so on. For now, let's just focus on our smart materials. So these are some presets that we can use that are built up using fill layers like we learned earlier. So let's say if we want a bronze armor material, we can just go ahead and we can select it, left mouse, and we can drag it either directly on the model or on the layers. This is called your layer stack, by the way. Let's just drag it on the model and you can see that we now have a bronze armor on it. So let's go ahead and take a deeper look at what a smart material is exactly. Over here, we can see that we have a folder. We can create folders. For example, if we have a fill layer, we can make another fill layer. And then if you select the layers that you want to group together, you can hold down Shift, click the next one. Then we can right click We can say group layers, or as you can see, we can hit Ctrl G. Try to get used to using the short key, so we're gonna say Ctrl G. Now we have a folder and we can name that my folder. So this is basically what a smart material is. If we take a look at bronze armor, you can see that we have a bunch of fill layers and some effects that are grouped together in a folder which is called bronze armor. So knowing that, now we can take a look at how we can adjust a smart material. A good smart material is always defined clearly what each layer is. So over here we can see we have the base metal, we have dirt, surface details, edges, damage and sharpen. So if I look to the names, we can clearly see base metal. If we go there, we can, for example, choose to change the color of the metal. If we take it from a brownish to a white, we're gonna get a whitish metal, as you can see. You can go ahead and make this more shiny by making the roughness more black. The more black, the more shiny. Let's also go ahead and click the eye icons to hide all the other layers on top of it. So you might be thinking, now that we just have a fill layer, which is a solid color, why do we have these details? That's because we have a finished rough fill effect on top. So if we disable that, you'll see that that disappears. We can do the same for the fill, and then you can see that we completely have a boring looking solid material. So we can add fills and effects to break that material up and make it look more realistic. We're not gonna cover how to do that just yet. I just want you to be aware of why it's not a solid color. And in a later video, we're gonna be taking a look at how we can add that ourselves. Now we're just gonna be focusing on manipulating a smart material. So we can say, okay, I like the base. Let's take a look at the dirt. Dirt's not really visible. Let's alt click this. We can see that we basically don't have anything happening with the mask. Click the mask editor. See that we're missing some maps that this material needs. Now let's make it nice and easy. We're gonna click over here so we can delete the mask. Now we have a solid black mask. Now we're just gonna be painting some dirt in. So I'm gonna hit M to switch to a material view. Now over here, we can take a look at brushes. We're going to be changing to a brush. So since we have dirt, let's look for a dirt brush. Now over here we have dirt 1, we take that. Then over here we can see the color of our brush is black. Let's hit X to go to white. Again, hitting X just switches between black and white. Or you can go down. And we can take the grayscale up or down. For now, let's go with a full white. Now we can start to paint some dirt on our material. Don't worry about how this looks. Just get accustomed to painting some dirt. Now let's say if we want a little bit of dirt, we can take this intensity down to maybe 0.4. Now we'll be painting the dirt with a lower opacity. Again, if we alt click the mask, we can check our mask out. We can go even lower to have it more subtle. Then M to go back to material view. Now we can see that we have our dirt. Although this dirt doesn't look like mud, how I want it to look like. So we're gonna click on the layer icon. Now in the base color, we're gonna be changing this to a brown. Then let's take the roughness down or up. Now we can hit C to go to channel. I'm gonna go to our base color. I'm gonna be adjusting the color a little bit more, so we get something that we like. Now I'm gonna hit M to see how that all looks together. And I'm happy with how that looks. Enable the surface details. This doesn't really do anything because we're lacking a mask. For now, let's just delete this. So let's delete and edges damage. Let's also delete that one. And then we're going to be enabling our sharpen. Now we've edited our first smart material. So what I want to show you with this is why smart materials are so practical. Because at any time, if you want to make any changes to your material, you can just go to a specific layer. Then we can go ahead and change the values of that layer, which is going to result in a different looking material. So let's go ahead and delete this. Let's go back to our smart materials. I'm going to be creating something that looks a little bit nicer. Let's go ahead and go with maybe machinery. Let's drag that, see how that looks. It looks very boring. Let's delete that one. Maybe jade. That one looks pretty cool. So let's go with that one. But I do want to make this a white jade. So instead of looking at the video, pause the video and try to make it white yourself. And if you didn't figure out how to do it, I'm going to show you now. We open up our smart material, we go to base, we adjust the base color to a white. Now in the AO darkness, I'm going to be changing this to a white as well, as it's adding color. Cloud colors, let's make this a white-ish as well. Veins has a little bit of green, let's go ahead and make that white. We're just going to be going through all the colors and we're going to be making everything white or gray. Now we have a white looking material. Let's also up the roughness a little bit. The base, so we have some nice looking reflections. And then lastly, let's go ahead and add a second smart material. Let's go with a ladder. So smart material, we can look for ladder. Then we can just take one that we like. Go ahead and try to go with the ladder calf grain and see how that looks. I'm just going to drag it in the layer stack. If I drag it underneath, nothing happens. Let's go ahead and delete that. Instead, I'm going to drag it on top. So it's laying on top of it. Now you can see that we have a ladder. So since I want to show both, we need to create a mask. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to say add black mask. Now we have a black mask. Then we can go ahead and we can use polygon fill. So this is a tool that you're going to be using all the time. Now over here we can say this polygon needs to be filled with white. So we take a look at the mask. You can see this polygon is white, which means it's going to show that smart material. This works the same as masking in Photoshop. Do that. Ctrl Z to go back. Let's go ahead and drag just a line like this over the top. Now when we go back to paint, the wireframe will disappear. Now we have a model with some like stone and some leather on it. So I think my leather would look better if it was a black leather, so it matches better with the white. We can open up the ladder, we go to base, and we adjust the color. That's a black ladder. Let's also go ahead and mess with the roughness to make it more or less shiny. And let's go with something like that. So by now you should be a little comfortable with dragging smart materials into the layer stack and adjusting the values. If you don't feel comfortable yet doing so, you can go ahead and take a look again at this lesson and go over it again, because this is going to be a very important principle in texturing, and you should be feeling somewhat comfortable with it at this point. Don't worry though, we're going to go in much more depth in the later videos. So let's go ahead and delete all this. I'm going to be talking about filters, which is going to be another very important, useful feature. Let's go ahead and choose one of the ladders, maybe this one. And filters are very practical because they allow you to quickly adjust things on the fly. So let's say if we don't like the color of this material, we could either open up our smart material, look for where we're adding the color, so maybe over here, and we can change the color in here. Or what we can do, instead of going into our smart material and look for where we're setting the color, you can go filters, you can take a HSL, which stands for hue, saturation, lightness. We're gonna put this all the way on top of our layers within the smart material. Then if we want to make this a different color, we can adjust the hue of our material. Let's say we want a brownish looking material. We can get like a yellowish. Then we're gonna down the saturation a little bit, as more with the hue. And maybe we want this to be a little bit less bright, and we can lower the brightness. Now if we have successfully changed the color. So you might be thinking, why should I do this instead of just going to the base and doing the color over there? And if you remember from the last video, if we go to smart materials and we look for that jade material again, if we drag this on top, let's say we want to make this a red material, we can go to base, we can make this red. But as you see, we still have a lot of other colors in it, because we have so many elements in this material that are making up the color. It would be more time consuming to go into every layer and make that red. Just gonna undo all this a little bit. Let's drag the jade again. Actually, we already had one, let's delete one. So instead of going layer by layer, adding red tones to it, we can just go to filters, hue, saturation, drag this all the way on top. Now we can say hue, and we're going to change that until it turns red. Up the saturation and put the lightness down a little bit. So that's going to be a lot faster. One thing, it's important where you place the saturation effect. If we take this and we put it all the way down, it's only going to be applied to our base. It's going to be applied to everything that's underneath our effect. So this can allow for rapid iteration on the look of your material. So we don't need to go layer by layer, and we can just adjust things. Let's go ahead and delete our jade and go back to our ladder. Effects are not limited to just color. We can apply it to each channel. So let's say the roughness that we have over here. Again, roughness decides how shiny the material is or how rough. So let's say I want this material, this leather, to be more rough. Again, we could look in our smart material. Probably have to go with the first one and look for the roughness. But sometimes we don't want to look and we just want to do quick adjustments. So we can use any effect that we have. For now, I'm just going to use the HSL again. Keep it nice and simple. And I'm going to drag that on top. So if we want something to be more rough, it needs to be lighter in color. We can drag up the lightness and you will see that it's not adjusting the roughness but the color. That's because on top of our filter we have some buttons which are gonna decide to what channel to apply the effect. If we put this to height, it will also apply it to height. If we apply it to roughness, it will apply it to roughness. You can see as soon as we applied it to roughness, our material became less shiny. So one little tip that you should remember: if you just want it to be applied to one channel, you can hold down Alt and click that channel. I'm holding down Alt and clicking roughness. Now it's only going to be applied to the roughness. If I hold down Alt color, only to the color. Let's put it to roughness. And then we can decide with the slider how shiny the material is or how rough the material is. Let's go with a very rough looking leather. So good practice. If we're using filters, let's go ahead and make sure that we name our filters, because this quickly becomes very difficult to keep track of if we have multiple effects. So what we want to do is we take our first one and we say color, adjustment. Then the next one we're going to call roughness, adjustment. So this way we know exactly what it does and we can easily toggle it off and on. And if we say, hey, this leather is too rough, it will be very easy to open our material, look on the top to where we have our filters, select the roughness. Then to adjust that filter, we have to click over here on our filter. And then we adjust that. Now we have a shiny leather again. So filters are very nice to quickly iterate over your material. As a little extra, let's show some other filter stuff. I'm going to keep this very nice and simple. So we're just going to be covering one, which is the sharpen filter. This is a filter that you'll use quite often as well. So if we take the sharpen, we can drag it on top of our material, our smart material. And this is going to sharpen everything up. So if we hit C, 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 and we look for the base color, you can see that we can adjust the sharpness of that texture. This can help make it look a little bit more detailed. Usually you don't want to go with a very extreme texture, with a very extreme sharpness intensity, as it will make the texture look very burnt and pixelated. Usually you want to keep this nice and subtle. Now we have a nice sharp looking leather. So finally, now that we're all ready, let's go ahead and save our project. So to save our project, so we don't lose our work, we go File and we say Save As. Then over here, we're gonna need to choose a name. So you wanna name your project based on the model that you're texturing. Let's say you're modeling a character, a knight. The knight is called Dark Knight. Then you'd call this project Dark Knight or something along those lines. Now let's go ahead and call this cylinder. We're texturing a cylinder. Now we just say save, and that's it. Now anytime we close Painter, we can go ahead and say file, open. We can go ahead and open a file. So we can open our cylinder. So if you do want to find this file, I'm gonna be putting it down below the video so you can download it and have a look at it in case you want to. If not, this is gonna be the end of this chapter, and in the next chapter we're gonna be taking a look at creating a more advanced project, which is gonna be a little bit more useful for actually texturing an asset in production. So make sure that everything that I covered in this chapter is clear so we can move on to the next chapter and we can make it a little bit more complicated and fun. So to start this new chapter off, we're going to be creating a more advanced project. We're going to be texturing this leather belt that I made a while ago. I'm going to show you how I would do this in a production pipeline. So we're gonna act like this is a real asset and we're gonna go through the whole workflow of texturing it. So before we jump into that, let's quickly explain what a baked map is. So whenever you're doing something in 3D, you're gonna have a high poly and a low poly. The high poly is gonna be very dense in polygons because we're gonna put all our sculpted detail into this. Then once we finish the high poly, we need to have a low poly. This will be a version of that mesh with less polygons. So it's more optimized to put in game. And this one will also have UVs, on which we're gonna put the textures on in Painter. But before we get to texturing, we need to get the detail from a high poly back onto our low poly, because we don't want to lose all this work. So I'm gonna be showcasing two baked maps as an introduction to this chapter. And let's start off with the normal map. The normal map is gonna be responsible for the detail. If we go to Maya, we can put a normal map on this and then it will change how the light reacts to the surface, making it look more detailed. This is gonna sound a little bit vague and complicated, but don't worry, you don't need to know how anything of this works. I just want to let you quickly know more or less how it works. But don't worry if you don't get it, it's not important. So if we go to Photoshop, we can take a quick look at how a normal map looks. So you'll see like a bluish reddish map, which is gonna have all our details of our high poly. Then the other map that I wanted to showcase is gonna be the ambient occlusion map. Again, this is a map to bring detail back. This mostly gonna be to bring shadows back from our high poly on a low poly. So these are all baked shadows, which are gonna be like fake shadows on a low poly. But to get that shadow of the details of the high poly back. So again, like I said, if you don't understand this yet, don't worry about it. You don't need to know it. And in the next video, I'm gonna showcase you how we can get those maps. So let's get started with actually texturing our leather belt. Also, you can find the leather belt model underneath the video in a zip file, and will contain the high poly that we need for baking and the low poly. So you should download that. Then we can go new, Gonna select the template. Again, we're gonna be sticking to PBR metallic roughness. Select the file. And you wanna click belt low FBX. Set the resolution to 4K. If your computer is not great, you can keep this at 248. We can also change this later on, so don't worry about the resolution you choose. Open GL, and then the rest we can all leave as it is. And then we just say OK. Now we have our project created. So a good habit is the first thing that you do when you create a project, you go File, and we're gonna save the project. I'm gonna save out this project, and I'm also gonna be giving you the file at the last video of this course, in case you do wanna dig in my Painter file and look around. And that will be available underneath the video as well then of the last video of chapter 5. Let's go ahead and call this letter belt and save. So let's go ahead and showcase you how to bake your maps to get the detail from the high poly back, like we talked about in the last video. So we want to click this croissant icon. Then it's gonna open up some complicated looking stuff. All that we need to do for now is taking the baking log and we're gonna drag that to the right. Now over here at high definition meshes, we're gonna click this page icon. Now we're gonna choose belt underscore high FBX. Now give it some time to load. Once that's there, we can go ahead and we can go to high and we're gonna hide that. Also, we're gonna hide the cage, so we can just see the low poly. Now that we have our high poly loaded and we've hidden it, we're ready to do a bake. So over here we have the baked maps that we want. Again, now you should recognize the normal map and the ambient occlusion like we talked about, but we have a bunch more: world space, ID, curvature, position, thickness, height, bend normals, and opacity. The last three you don't really need to worry about too much. We're gonna ignore them for now. And let's quickly go over each map. So the normal map is going to give detail by making the surface react to light in a different manner. The world space normal is kind of more or less the same. You don't really need to worry about it, but you're going to be using it for your masks that you're going to create. The ID map is going to be an important map to create masks for our smart materials. The ambient occlusion, again, it adds that fake shadow of the high poly. And then for curvature, position and thickness, don't worry too much about them either. They're just gonna be there to help us create masks. The only three important maps that you should worry about is the normal map, the ID map and the ambient occlusion. And with the ID, we need to change one thing. We need to do the color source from material color to vertex color. And the reason why is because in ZBrush, we've set up polypaint. And we're basically telling ZBrush, hey, for each element, we're gonna give it a different color, and then we can bake that color down onto a low poly. And with that color, we can create selections in Painter. Again, this sounds complicated, but it will be very easy once you see it in action. But for that to work, we do need to say that we need to take the vertex color. Now we're pretty much ready to go. Let's go ahead and put anti-aliasing at 64. Actually, for now, I'm just gonna do a quick bake to showcase something. Let's put the output size to 4K. Even if your project is set at 1K or 2K, it's best to bake it in double the resolution. Let's say if your final texture is gonna be in 2K, you should be baking in 4K. One exception, if your final texture is gonna be 4K, just bake it at 4K, because 8K is gonna be an extreme size to work with. So for now we can just hit bake selected textures. Depending on your PC, this can take a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. Now if we take a look at our low poly, you can see that we have all the detail back of our high poly. Now we actually get something that looks quite nice. One thing that you might notice is that we have a few weird things going on where we have intersections. For example, over here it's projecting the buckle onto the leather belt. One way to avoid that is to separate your mesh in different meshes. So if we take a look at the Maya, you can see that we have a buckle low with just the buckle, a belt low with just the belt, and a buckle clip. And the reason why I'm separating the clip from the buckle for example, is that these are intersecting with each other. So if we were to bake them together in the same baking group, we would get some projection errors over here. And then in ZBrush, you want to separate the high polys as well. So you can see you have the belt high, the buckle high, and the buckle clip high. So in order for that to work in Painter, we need to do one thing. We need to go to Match and say by mesh name. So when you're doing this, it's important that your mesh names are the same. So belt underscore low, buckle underscore low. If we take a look in ZBrush, you will see that they match. The only thing that shouldn't match is the suffix. So after the name, it should be underscore low or underscore high. So we go to Painter. We can check if the matching by name is set up correctly by going to matching by name. You can see that the buckle low has the buckle high and so on. If there's a mismatch, it will put like a red name here with the mismatched name. So now if we take a look at this little baking issue, if we bake the textures again, you can see that that disappeared. Because right now it's just baking the buckle onto the buckle. That will give you much nicer bakes. So after you bake, you want to check all over your mesh if you have any issues popping up with your bake. It seems that everything is baking fine except for this area. When you have a little bake issue with that, one of the first things that you can check is your UVs. If those are all alright, it means that you need to adjust the settings a little bit. So what we can do is we're gonna enable the cage surface, the cage wireframe, and let's show the high poly mesh. The next step, we're gonna hide the low poly. Let's go ahead and make the opacity of the cage a little bit stronger. Let's give this another color. Go with like greenish color or whatever. So what does this mean, this cage? If we take a look at the low, let's hide the high poly actually. You will see that the cage has the same wireframe as our low poly. So we take a look at this. and go to Maya, you will see that it will have the same. It's basically an inflated mesh. And we can choose how inflated it is. And it's going to look for the high poly until it hits the cage. So imagine it going like this and looking for the high poly. But sometimes your cage can start to intersect and can result in weird baking errors. So the best way to bake is you can show your high poly, high to low poly. And then we want to try to push the cage as close as possible to the high poly without intersecting. As soon as we intersect, you can see that we have a matching error in red. So we want to try to push that as close as we can until we have no red. All the way up until here. Which is probably not enough to fix that issue, but let's go ahead and give that a try. I'm gonna hide everything except for the low poly. Let's try to bake that again. You can see that wasn't enough to fix it. So sadly, whatever value I put, I wasn't able to fix this issue right here. This is one of the more painful parts of baking with Painter. Painter doesn't give you a lot of options to fix baking issues. Which is why I personally, in my own work, I bake with Marmoset, because we have more control over the bake. And then I import those baked maps in Painter and texture with them. But for now, let's keep it nice and simple. We're gonna just be working with that little issue. If you really wanted to fix it in Painter, you could do like 2 bakes and you separate this mesh from this, and then you combine the 2 maps that you baked in Photoshop and you paint it out. But for now, let's just focus on this. So if everything bakes well, how you want it to bake, then we can go ahead and go to anti-aliasing. Put this at 64. And then we're ready to bake again. This is gonna make everything look a little bit nicer and softer, but this is gonna take a little bit more time. This is why you usually first do a quick test bake with a little bit of a lower resolution, especially if you have a computer that's not too fast. Then once we're happy with the bake, we put super sampling on 64 and we bake the textures. You will see that it looks a little bit nicer, the bake. So we can preview each baked map by hitting B. Then we can just go in between the bakes. As you can see, our ID is empty. Seems that we forgot to put it to vertex color. Let's put that to vertex color. I'm gonna go ahead and disable the other maps, because I only need to bake the ID map again. That will make it a little bit faster, as we only bake 1 map. Also, let's go back to our settings. And for the ID map, we should put the anti-aliasing at none. And then we can just bake that texture out. You'll see that we get our colors back now. So that's it for baking the maps. In the next video, we're gonna be setting up our project. But before we do so, let's go ahead and make a quick save. so we don't need to bake again in case Painter crashes at some point. So if we switch back to the paintbrush icon, we can go to painting mode. And let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about ID maps. We covered it really quick earlier in ZBrush, where I showed you the colors, and we can use these colors to mask out our stuff in Painter. So we can go over here, mesh maps, and we can say ID. Now I noticed that I have a little bake error. We forgot to go ahead and match it by mesh name. So I'm just gonna rebake and then we get back. So you can see after we bake with match by name that error is gone. So let's say I wanna mask the blue. You can create a fill layer. We right click, and instead of clicking add white mask or black mask, we can say add mask with color selection. On the left, we can choose pick color. Now we can choose a color where we want that mask to be applied to. Let's say the blue. Let's go ahead and make this blue. And you can see that it's just applied to what was blue. So we can do this again. Add mask with color selection. Hit the yellow part and make this yellow. So you can see this is a very nice way to get masks that work with your high poly without needing to paint the mask manually. This is very fast, and you will use ID maps for any asset that you will texture. Let's do one more. And let's do the last one for the stitches. So whenever you do ID maps, we have a few settings that we can mess around with. So let's say I want a certain material on more than just one color. We can do pick color again, and we can choose a second color. We're not limited to just one color. We can go ahead and adjust the hardness and the tolerance. These settings are more useful, for example, when you have two colors in your ID map that are very similar to each other. Here we can say how, for example, if we have this green, if we had another color that was similar to the green, if we up the tolerance, it would pick up on that similar green. For now, don't worry too much about it, as we have a very simple ID map. We can also use ID maps in a different way. Let's say we have a white mask, everything is blue. And then I want to have the stitches out of this. So what we can do is we can add color selection. Then we say background is white. And then we have an output value that is black. Now if we pick a color, anything that we pick will be filled with black. If you don't get it completely, don't worry, in the next video we're gonna start blocking out our materials. And we're gonna be using this a lot, and it should become even more clear. So let's get started with our actual texturing. So whenever I'm starting my textures, I like to block out the materials and the masks. So the first thing that I'm gonna be looking at is what materials do we have. So over here we're gonna have two materials, a leather material for the belt, and then a metal material for the buckle. So we're gonna create a fill layer, let's call this lattice. Actually, let's call this leather. And then we're gonna group that, and let's call this ladder as well. Then we're gonna duplicate this, Control D to duplicate. Or you can do Control C and Control V, or go here and duplicate layers. So let's call this one metal. And let's actually go ladder base values. This one we're going to be changing to metal base values. Now for our ladder, let's set up some quick base values. So we're going to go with a brown belt. So we're going to make this brown. Also, let's hide the metal on top. Let's make a nice shiny ladder. Metallic should be at black because it's a non-metallic surface. And then the normal we can ignore. Let's do the same for the metal. This should be at 1 or white because it's metal. Let's make this a little less shiny. Then we're going to be using a nice bright white color. Now we have our values blocked out. Let's go ahead and do the masks. So there's two ways of doing this. We can either right click, add mask with color selection, pick color and pick the red color. But my preferred way is when we have a whole object that will just be a single mask. We can go add black mask and we can go to the polygon fill. We can set the mode to mesh fill, use a value of 1, which is pure white. Then we just click the whole mesh. I'm gonna repeat that for this. Now for the ladder, we cannot do the same. Actually, we can for the first part of the ladder. So let's just do that. I'll say add black mask. Then we go to polygon fill. I'm gonna click that one. If we alt click it, we can check if the mask is correct, and that looks fine. So now let's make this a little bit more complicated. Ladder base values, we're gonna say Ctrl G, group it. I'm gonna call this top. Then Ctrl D. Let's call this bottom. Move this one up, and actually let's call this top layer. Let's hide the top layer for now and worry about the bottom. So ladder is not just shiny. Ladder exists mostly of two layers. First we have a very rough layer, and on top of that is going to be a thin shiny ladder, as you can see like in our model. So for the bottom, let's make this very rough. Let's use almost a pure white value. Now for the top, let's make this very shiny. Now we need to go to the top layer. I'm going to say add mask with color selection. Now we're going to be using our ID map. Now we're going to be clicking the blue. So now you can see that we have one part being shiny and the other part being rough. To make that even more clear, we can change the value to pink just to showcase that. One problem, this is also adjusting the stitches. We want a different value for the stitches as well. So we can do another fill. Let's group that, call this stitches. Let's go ahead and add mask with color selection and select our stitches. You can pick the eye color here. And if we hold down shift, you can click a color from the base color. If we don't, it will have the color of the reflections in it. So hold down shift and click it. Now we're just gonna bump up the value and the saturation up a little bit. Maybe a little bit less. Something like this. And let's make the stitches very rough as well. And now we've blocked out our materials really quick. You should be aiming to get a quick representation of what your final textures is gonna look like. I see it as a quick block out. And one of the most important parts is that we now have all the masks set up already. We just need to replace the folders, the content of them. So before we get to creating our nice first smart material by ourselves out of layers, I want to showcase you once again the power of effects. This is because we're going to be using that a lot to create our smart material. So for example, here we have our stitches and we want them to be a little bit brighter and like a different color so they stand out from the rest. So what we did is we added a fill layer. But this is a pretty destructive workflow, because let's say, hey, I don't want the leather to be brown. Actually, I want like a bluish leather. Now if we make like a bluish leather, you will see that the stitches don't make sense anymore, because they're not like a bluish stitch. So something that we can do instead, let's go ahead and just go to filters, HSL, let's go ahead and drag that in here. I'm going to be calling this stitches. Then we right click this mask and we say, if I can find it, we say copy mask or Ctrl-Alt-C. On this layer, we're going to say paste mask or Ctrl-Alt-V. So again, get used to using the shortcuts and we're going to paste that. Now we can delete the stitches folder as we don't need it anymore. So now instead of thinking of colors and whatever, we're thinking in values. So if we go here to the HSL, you can see the color. We don't want like a lightest brown color. We want the color that's lighter. So let's go ahead and just bump up the lightness. And that's it. Maybe a little bit lighter and a little bit more saturated. So now let's say if we made a bluish leather, you will see that the stitches automatically stay true to that color. Because all that we're saying is, okay, we have stitches and we want them to be a little bit lighter. So this is a way that you become a little bit less destructive in your texturing and will be easier to update your material. One thing that we can do is we can add filters to filter layers. So this is just a normal layer which holds a filter. As you can see, we have layer and holds a filter. So what we can do is we can go on the magic wand icon, add filter. Now this is a filter that's empty. Actually, that was on the wrong one. It should be on stitches. So add filter. Now we have an empty filter. Now we can look on our filters, or we can search for our filter and we're gonna go to contrast, luminance. So I'm gonna drag that one in the filter slot. Or what you can do, you can click on the filter slot. You can look for it over here. Again, we want this to be just in one channel, so we're going to alt click that channel and we want the roughness. So alt click the roughness. We take a quick look at the roughness here. Make sure this is going to be all the way to white to get very rough stitches. So it doesn't seem like it's doing anything because the first layer is already white. But let's say if we adjust this and we make this a little bit more shiny, you will see that the stitches will always stay super rough. And let's go with that. So you can see by using filters, we can work in a non-destructive way. And generally speaking, it's also going to be faster to build up your materials. So let's take a look at how we can actually create a nice looking smart material from scratch ourselves. And to do that, I'm going to be focusing on our top layer. Let's go ahead and take the ladder base values, and we're going to say Ctrl G to group it. Let's call this base values. Now we want to have a little bit of variation in the color. So again, I'm hitting the C key to swap between the channels. Because this is going to look very fake and boring, because it's all the same color without any breakup. So what we could do, we could add the fill layer and go with and hide this and select that color, then make it a little bit lighter, and then add a mask with variation. But again, this is a very annoying thing to do and very destructive if we change the base color. So like I showcased you earlier, you can create a HSL, and all that we want is this value to be a little bit lighter, maybe a bit more saturation. Then we call this lighten. Then we're going to add a new filter. We're going to use a contrast luminance. I'm going to put this in the roughness. Alt click it, and we're going to lighten up the roughness as well. There we go, roughness. Actually, keep this a base color over here, roughness. You can see that we can lighten that up, which means it becomes more rough. I'm going to switch back to M from material. So that's great. Now we have something that lightens our material up, but we need to work on the variation. We need a mask. We right click, add black mask. Then over here we can add a fill to that mask, which now means that we can fill it with anything that we want. The default is going to be a slider from 1 to 0. If it's 0, it's filled with black, so you will see nothing. 1 is pure white, so you'll see everything. But what we want to do, instead of using a slider, want to go ahead and go to starter assets, clear the search as well. I'm going to go to procedurals, and let's go to grunges, for example. Now you can go noises, whatever. Let's work with a noise for now. These are going to be tileable images. And what tileable means is that it just repeats itself without a visible seam. So for example, we can say clouds 3. We drag that in here. Now if we alt click the mask, we can see what we're working with. Let's go ahead and change the UV projection to triplanar projection. This is going to help by blending in the seams of the mesh. So for example, on UV projection, if we have a seam in the UVs, you can clearly see it. We put it to triplanar, you're not going to be able to see the seams as much. Let's go ahead and put the tiling up, which means we're scaling our map down. Then we can adjust the balance and the contrast. So play with it until you get a value that you like. Now if we hit C to go to color again, you can see that we have now a nice broken up surface. We got some light and some darks. I think the contrast could be a bit more, so I'm gonna up that a bit. That's looking good. One problem, this is a very obviously repeating pattern. So we can fix that by adding a new fill. Then we're gonna choose a new map. This time let's go ahead and use a crunch. These are gonna be a little bit more dirty looking. Let's go with this one, for example. I'm gonna put this to triplanar again. Adjust the tiling. And let's go ahead and rotate this a little bit so it follows the mesh a bit better. Then now we're gonna put this to multiply. What this is gonna do, it's gonna go ahead, and if you take a look at this black, it's gonna apply all those blacks on top of what we had. And that's gonna break up the tiling of that first map really nice. Go ahead and go with a less big tile. So we're trying to break that up. Usually it's enough with just having one breakup, but you can go as many as you want. You can add 5 on top of each other, and if you like the result, it's all nice. For now, let's keep it simple and just have one multiply on top of this. So now what we're gonna do, we're gonna go ahead and duplicate this. Let's change the name and we're gonna call this darken. Gonna hide the lighten. This one's gonna be used to darken the values. So I'll put this down. Usually I up the saturation as well when I darken stuff, just so we get a nice colorful effect. Let's go ahead and change up these maps. So I'm just gonna hide that breakup on top of it. Now clouds 3, we can go ahead and choose a different map. You can just drag maps on and see which ones you like and which ones you don't like. I think this one looks pretty interesting right from the start, so that's nice. Let's mess with the size. I think something like that is pretty cool. Gonna be messing with the balance and the contrast till we get something that we like. I think something like that is nice. Now again, let's add some breakup on that. Go with a different map. And we can also mess with different blending modes. Maybe instead of taking away, we want to add stuff. So the easiest way to mess with this is you just alt click it so you can see a mask. You just click normal, for example, and then we can hit arrow key down, hit normal, and then arrow key down. That way we can go through the blending modes. We can look for one that's interesting to us. Just trying to look for an effect that looks interesting. And I think like this, it looks pretty interesting. Then we can also still tone this down. If we do the opacity lower or higher, let's go with like 70. And then on top of that, we can add levels. We can adjust the levels of this mask, which basically means that we can push the whites and the blacks closer to each other or further away to have more contrast. So we start off with a pretty simple looking mask, then we can make it a little bit more interesting. Now looking at the material, I think we should have more dark values. We're going to up the balance all the way. Let's mess with the contrast. We're going to do the same here, mess with those values. Also, if this is really slow for you, again, you can just put this to 2K and it will be way faster. And don't worry, you're still texturing at 4K, and later when we export, we can just put it back at 4K. So I think I like something like this. Now let's go ahead and enable our lighten. put the lighten on top of the darken, see how that looks. I think that looks a little bit nicer. I think our darken is very strong. Also, let's go ahead and adjust our contrast luminous, so our roughness. Make that darker as well. Let's tone down the darkness a little bit. Something like this. So I think now looking to this overall, I think it's a little bit too shiny. We can go back to our base value. Now we can decrease the roughness. And since we have everything set up with filters, you will see if we change that base, everything is gonna be updated. Because we're working with a non-destructive workflow. I want to have a little bit more variation in the roughness. So we can go to lighten. Let's go ahead and up the value here. So we have some more contrast. It's a little bit too much. And something like that is looking pretty nice. I'm gonna do one more. Let's duplicate the lighten. Let's call this saturation. This one that I usually like to add. With this one, I'm looking for something very subtle, so I'm gonna delete that breakup. I'm gonna be using Crunches Splash Dusty. Just something very simple with not too much going on. I want to keep this very subtle. Just gonna be upping. Also, let's get rid of the contrast on that one. We don't need to break up in the roughness for this, in my opinion. And let's go ahead and up the saturation on that. Maybe the lightness as well a little bit. Not entirely convinced on that, so let's mess with the size. Something like that. I think we have a little bit too much. So actually let's bring back a fill. Put it to multiply. Let's take away a little bit. We can use a clouds tree. We'll try planar projection. Alt click the mask, see what we're doing. Up the contrast and adjust the size. So now if we put the balance up, we're gonna have more saturated spots. If we put it down, we're gonna have less. Let's go with something like this. Now we're just adding some very subtle looking details, which is nice. Let's go ahead and take our saturation, lighten and darken. Select them all, Ctrl G. We're gonna call this breakup, as it's breaking up our base values. One thing that you might notice is that everything seemed to have disappeared once we did that. That's because when we have filters in a group, we need to go ahead and go to the blending mode and set this to pass-through. Now you will see that we have it back. One thing, we have a filter for the base color channel, and for the roughness, if we go roughness, you will see that we have nothing. That's because we need to go to the roughness. Now over here you will see it's set to normal and we need to set it to pass through. A better way of doing it is, let's go back to normal and to base color. We can just right click on pass through and say apply to all channels. Now we have all our breakup in its own little breakup layer. One thing, I want to have some big breakup in the roughness. This is what I always like to have on top. So I'll go to my filters, go to contrast and luminance. Also, I'm using the contrast luminance filter just for the roughness, just to have a little bit more clarity of, okay, when we have a HSL, it means that it's for the color. If we have a contrast luminous, it's gonna be for the roughness. Let's go ahead and put the roughness more black on this one. I'm gonna do add black mask, fill. Let's go ahead and add a grunge to this. I think this one could be interesting. Can alt click the mask, see what's going on, triplanar. Let's put the balance down. So for this, I just want some big spots with different values. Go ahead and put some offset on it to change where the white spots are. Maybe something like that. Go ahead and click C again, C to see the roughness and see how that is looking. And I think like this, we have some interesting variation in roughness. So let's call this big breakup. Let's also go ahead and try to see how it looks if we add a HSL to this for the color. I think that looks pretty cool actually, so let's keep it. That's gonna make it look quite nice and interesting. So let's recap a little bit. By adding variation to our values, we can make a material look more realistic and interesting. If everything is a single value, it's gonna look fake and uninteresting and undetailed and everything. By adding some quick variations with masks, we can go ahead and create interesting looking materials. You can see the more variation, the more breakup we add, the better it starts to look. It's also important that you have smaller breakups and bigger breakups. Think about the primary, secondary, tertiary structure, which in short words is we need to have small structures, we need to have bigger structures, and we need to have really big structures. So right now, our big breakup would be our primary breakup. Then our secondary breakup would be the lighten and darken. And then our tertiary breakup would be our small saturated spots that we've put in. By reinforcing this structure of primary, secondary, tertiary, we can ensure that we have interesting looking breakup. So now that we've finished our base values, we need to add some actual details in the normal map. And to do this, we're going to create a new layer. We're going to be creating a fill layer. Let's go ahead and call this details. So over here, we want to have some details for our material. Since we have a leather material, let's go ahead and add some leather details. I want to add a black mask. Then we're going to add a fill. Then over here, we can just look in texture for leather. Now you can either use a tiling leather map that you downloaded online from somewhere, or you can use the default one in Painter. For now, we're just going to be using the default one in Painter. So if we alt click this map, you can see our ladder. This one I don't want to set to triplanar projection because I want the details to follow the direction that I've set in the UVs. Now let's go ahead and adjust the tiling of it so we can get smaller details of the ladder, or we can get bigger details of the ladder. So good rule is to go a little bit bigger than you would have in real life. So for example, in real life, it would be more like 2.8 maybe. Like it's very small looking detailed ladder. But this is not gonna read well once we zoom out. Usually when you do stuff for games, you wanna over-exaggerate the size of things a little bit, so they read better from a distance. So maybe we can go with 1.8 instead. Let's alt click this. And if we take a look at this, everything that's going to be white is going to be shown. Everything that's going to be black is going to be invisible. So I think in our case it would be easier if this map was inverted in color. So we can go ahead and do a levels, and we can say invert. Now you can see we just have some ladder crack details showing through. So what we can do now is we're gonna alt click height, because we only want to put some height for now. Again, just like with the channels, it will just have it in the height channel now. Now we're gonna add a little bit of height. This should be going in. Also, it's a little noisy, this map. What we can try to do is we can add a filter and a blur. This is gonna blur out our mask a bit. Let's keep this at a very subtle value of maybe 0.1. So that looks still a little bit too much. 0.7. 6. Just want to see how low I can go until it becomes noisy again. So I think like 6 is a good value. This is just gonna make it look a little bit softer and less noisy. Right now we just have noise. Now we're actually getting some details. I think we can also bump this up to maybe 0.9 to get it looking nice and soft. Let's also go ahead and try the other ladder. Just gonna clear this and look for a ladder. Let's see how this looks if we put this one in here. And I do think I prefer the first one, so let's undo that. Maybe let's go with 1.4 instead, so it becomes a little bit more readable. Maybe 1.3. We can mess as long as we want with the size. I think I'm gonna go with 1.1 so it's nice and readable. Let's go ahead and give it a little bit more depth maybe. Just like this. So now we have some details in the height, which is gonna make it look more detailed in the normal plus height mesh. You can see we have those details popping through. But we also want this to be in the color. So what we can do is we can add a fill. Actually, we can add a filter. Excuse me. And the filter, we're gonna add a HSL. Then we're gonna go ahead and put the lightness up or down. You will see nothing happens because right now we have our blending mode set to normal. Let's change this to pass through. Now you will see it will start to do things. bump up the saturation. It's not just becoming white. And look for something that looks nice and natural. And again, because we're doing this with filters, if we were to change our very first base value to like a green, you will see that now we have a perfectly looking nice green ladder. Let's go back to our details. I'm gonna add one more filter. Also right click the pass through, apply to all channels. Actually, let's undo that. I don't want it in the height, so Ctrl C. Let's go to height and then roughness. I'm gonna put this to pass through. Now if we go to the roughness channel, let's go ahead and fill this with a contrast luminance filter. I'm gonna make this very like rough. So now this looks all messed up because we forgot to alt click the roughness. Now you can see we have some ladder details. This is looking very strong, the details. So let's go ahead and adjust it a little bit. I think we can tone down the color a little bit more. Something like this. Let's mess with the height. Do something like this. Now that's starting to look a lot better. Now I want to add a little bit of a breakup in our details. So if we alt click this, we can go ahead and add a fill. Go ahead and clear the search. Just like before, we can add something here. Let's go with a clouds. Clouds 2. Try planar projection so we don't have the seams popping through. Adjust the tiling a little bit. Up the contrast and the balance down a bit. Let's set this through multiply. So now wherever we have that dark value, the effect is going to be less strong of the details. Up the tiling. Just the balance. So just something like this. I think we're taking away too much detail. So we can just go ahead and adjust the opacity of this. And if we tone it down, we get everything back. Let's just start toning it up until it's nice and subtle, the variation. And that's looking pretty nice. Do you think that perhaps we can make it a little bit more light, the details? Saturation a bit. Maybe something like that. Now you can see this starting to look like a pretty natural, worn out looking ladder. And that should do it for our details. So right now we have base values and then we have details. Now there's going to be one more like layer to creating a smart material, which is going to be adjustments. So we have base values. We can right click this, give this a color. Let's do the same for the details. And then we're going to have one more folder with some adjustments. The adjustments are meant to quickly change the look of our material. So let's say we want to adjust the color a little bit. We can say color balance or color correct. It's a little bit nicer. Let's put this on top. Let's group this and let's call this adjustments. Give this a blue color. Let's put notice to pass through, apply to all channels. So now we can start to color correct this a little bit. We can say let's up the contrast. Maybe up the luminosity a little bit. Maybe down the saturation. Mess with the midtones. Now we can very quickly get a totally different feeling leather. So I do like how that looks. Maybe it's a little bit too strong in the effect. So we go to base color. Now we can change the opacity of that in the base color channel. Let's put this to something like 79 perhaps. We can do the same for the roughness. So let's call this color. We're also going to do a color correct. Let's call this roughness. Go to the roughness channel. Alt click rough. Now we can start messing with the values. Go to M to check the material. I think it's a little bit too shiny, but I like the new contrast that we have in it. So instead of toning this down, we can also go to base values, leather base values. I'm gonna go ahead and tone that roughness down a little bit. Now I think we have a very nice looking leather. I'm gonna add one more breakup for the color. Do a color balance this time. I'm gonna put that on top of the color just to keep the color all together. Let's call this color 2. Maybe we can mess a little bit with the colors here. This one doesn't seem to be doing a whole lot until we get to the shadows. Could be cool to make it a little bit more saturated, perhaps. Then I do want to mess a little bit more with this. So maybe we can add a levels to this. Affect the channel base color. And let's push these values around a little bit until we get something that looks cool. I'm gonna go with something very extreme for now. Then maybe we can tone this down and see how that starts to look. It's very subtle, I think that's nice. But now we want to add a little bit of variation. So we can add a black mask, the fill. Now we can do a cloud. Try planar. Let's up the contrast and go with a very small balance. And up the tiling a little bit. Maybe a little bit down the contrast and balance. Now we're just gonna get a few spots where the color gets a little bit more intense. So even when we're adjusting stuff, this is still an opportunity to add some more breakup and variation within our material. Maybe we can go back to our details at this point. Mess a little bit more with the height and the size. So I'm showing you that you can always jump around and mess with layers, which is very nice. We can keep on changing the look of our material. I think I'm pretty happy with the point that we have. Maybe we can up the height a little bit and try to add a little bit more blur. Maybe mess a bit more with the clouds, add less contrast, have a lower balance. So I feel like our roughness isn't like really popping through in the details. We can try to add levels. Put this to roughness. I'm gonna push that out and in a little bit. See if that helps. Which it definitely doesn't. Let's go ahead and delete that. We're just gonna duplicate that layer. Now we're gonna go ahead and actually let's just delete that instead of duplicating it. Let's make a fill layer. Actually not the best idea. Go ahead and delete that. I'm gonna duplicate the details. I'm gonna get rid of the HSL, get rid of the height. So we just have the roughness in here. Actually, let's talk about a new concept right now. Anchor points. We're not gonna get very much in depth about this. We're gonna get more in depth in a later video in the course about anchor points. Now we can just delete all this. Now on top of our mask, we can add an anchor point. Now with any layer above this anchor point, we can reference it. So we can say fill, anchor points, and we have details mask. That's just gonna place our mask in there. Then if we make any adjustments to it, it will update over here. So we can call this roughness plus, let's call this details, roughness plus. Let's keep this roughness plus, and we're just going to take the details and group it all together. Pass through, apply to all channels. Actually undo, we don't want it in the height. Let's go roughness and pass through. Now in our roughness, now that we've referenced the anchor point, we can add levels. We can adjust these values. So now we can try to get a little bit more white, which is gonna result in having more of that roughness in here. This is definitely too much. Let's tone it down a bit. Now our details are popping through nicely in the roughness. That's starting to look a lot nicer. So now let's talk about something very powerful of smart materials. Because all that we just did was create our very own smart material. Let's name this details. So at any time that we want to use this smart material, just like we have all these, we can save it. So all that we have to do is we're gonna group this together. Let's call this ladder. I'm gonna call this underscore Trigon. Now we right click, we say create smart material. Just like that. Now over here we have our ladder Trigon smart material. The reason why I grouped it together and not just used the top layer is because you cannot have a mask when you create the smart material. If you do it, you will get a very weird thumbnail. Also, the name of your smart material, it's gonna be what you put it in Painter when you created it. So you want to think about this a little bit, like I could have called this a ladder and just create a smart material. But let's say if we say ladder, we already have a lot of ladders. So it's gonna be difficult to find your own smart materials. Eventually, once you've built up a good library of smart materials, you're not really gonna be using the default ones that come with Painter anymore. Because generally speaking, your own ones are gonna be looking a little bit nicer. So now let's say I'm in a production environment. I'm starting a new asset, but I've already textured ladder 20 times. So I have a bunch of ladder smart materials that I've created before. So let's say I'm starting the project and I need a ladder. Now if we look for ladder, it's gonna show all these ladders. But if we go ladder Trigon, it will only show my own materials. So let's say if you're working in a studio environment, it can be a good idea that you do ladder underscore your name or whoever, and then you can look through the materials by name of the artist. Or we can say Trigon. Now it's gonna show all my materials because they're all underscore Trigon. So if I had more, it would show my metals, my plastics and everything. And then again, if I want a specific one, I could go ladder underscore Trigon and will show my ladders. So that's why it's important to keep a nice name on your smart materials, because you want to be thinking about how you're going to be looking for them in the future. So let's talk a little bit about how we can actually use our smart materials. I'm going to delete the work that we've done. Let's go back a little bit. Let's say ladder base values, duplicate this and put this in the top layer. Again, right now we're back at our block out that we had before. We just have our colors quickly blocked out and our masks. So this is what I would do in a production environment. I quickly get a block out of everything. And instead of creating a smart material, I will already have all the smart materials created, or at least the vast majority. So then I would just go to my stuff. I need a ladder. I'd go ladder Trigon, look through my ladders and decide on a ladder that I like. Then I would just drop and drag and drop it. Then we can take our ladder base and just get rid of it, and boom. Now we have textures. This is one of the strengths of Substance Painter. It's so easy to do work and then reuse your own work or the work of other people, which is going to save you a tremendous amount of time. When you're just learning, I do recommend to create a whole bunch of smart materials and learn from the process. Even if you have like 5 ladders already, if you are learning, it's always a good idea to just create new and new materials and learn every time you do it. So let's say again we're in a production environment and we have this ladder, but in the concept the ladder is black, but it's like very like old and worn, so everything matches more or less except for the color. What we can do is we can go look through our smart materials all the way to the base and change that. Or we can just go on top on the adjustment. We go to filters, we put a HSL all the way on top. And we say saturation, put it all the way down, and lightness, put it down. And now we have a black ladder. So you can see how fast and easy it is to adjust your work. Now let's go ahead and delete that, as we're gonna be sticking to a brown ladder. So now let's take a practical look at how we can replace our blockout with smart material preset. So we're gonna be using this as our preset, the ladder one. So now if we go to bottom, I'm gonna drag the ladder Trigon in bottom. Delete the ladder base values. Also hide the top layer. I'm gonna have a look at this and think, okay, this is not how we want it to look. We don't need the ladder cell details, so we go details, details, and we go crunch ladder damage. We're gonna replace that map. Maybe with, actually clouds could be fine for this. Put clouds in. Change the tiling. Let's get rid of all this breakup. Also, we don't need the roughness plus on this one. Let's get rid of the anchor point. Let's keep the levels. Actually, we can delete those. Let's go for like a noisy feel. Up the contrast, the balance. Now we're getting a little bit of details on here. But for this one, I want the height to be more extreme. Maybe something like that. Let's try different tiling. Maybe 8. Let's go ahead and change our base value. Make it way more rough. Take a look at darken, lighten. Okay, let's get rid of the adjustments. We're gonna simplify this one a little bit. Get rid of big breakup. Get rid of saturation. We're just gonna keep the lighten and darken. This one, we can just be really lazy about it. Up tiling. Actually, have the next one. Check the lighten. Go ahead and adjust the tilings on those. Maybe up the rotation a little bit. Just like that, we have a rough looking base layer for our ladder. So you can see within just a few minutes, I created a new material, which has a lot of detail and variation. So now we can go ahead and say ladder Trigon. Let's call this ladder base Trigon. I'm gonna go ahead and right click, create smart material. Now if we look for a ladder, let's go to Trigon. that's not popping up because we have the base afterwards. If we want to see all, we can go like Trigon. Now we can see we have a ladder Trigon for the top and a base. So now let's get our top layer showing. I'm gonna say top layer and show it. And you're gonna see that it's super noisy because the noise of the bottom layer is showing through. What we can do is we can go to height. I'm gonna say replace. That's gonna replace the height of the bottom layer. Just like that, now we have some ladder. Also, I do think we might need a little bit of a bigger breakup actually on the base. We can go back to breakup. Go to filter, HSL. Make this one really dark and maybe super saturated. Gonna add a black mask, fill, and let's add our clouds. I want to make sure that this is nice and big for a big primary breakup. See, now we have some big primary breakups. It's probably a bit too much. Something like this. Maybe the timing too. Change the rotation. Try to get the spots in a more visible place of the camera. Let's go ahead and tone that down a little bit to darken. Just like that. I think that looks a little bit nicer and more natural. So now we can do this again. Now the ladder is finished. Let's worry about the metal. We can go to Trigon. Make sure we're on smart materials. Now we can pick any that we'd like. Let's go with the base. Drag this here. Delete our block out. Make this metallic and let's make it nice and shiny. Now, once you're working with something that you're gonna change a lot, it's a good idea just to kind of go layer by layer. Let's go by base values, that is good. Let's go to breakup. So I'm not liking that. So let's go darken. Let's take a look what we're doing over here. Start off with this one. Adjust the balance. Maybe something like that. Something like that. Take a look. I don't want so much breakup in the color, I just want a lot of breakup in the roughness. The same for lighten, I think that one's pretty nice already. All we have to do is go ahead and adjust the rotation. So it follows the buckle a little bit better. And again, let's go ahead and make the contrast more intense. Maybe something like that. It's probably a little bit too much contrast, so let's tone that down. Let's add details. So over here, let's go with just a nice looking grunge. So we can say grunge. Make sure we're not looking on just smart materials. Maybe crunch damas could be cool. one's probably not gonna look as nice with the height that we have. But then tone that way down. Maybe this is not the grunge that we should be using. You can look for a metal one. Maybe this one. That's looking way nicer already. So you can see that we just need to experiment a little bit with different maps and everything. I think this is starting to look pretty interesting. Then lastly, I want to add a little filter on top of all this. Let's go filter. We can use a matte finish, which is going to adjust the normals a little bit, which is pretty nice when you're working with metals. And put this on top of the details. We take a look at the normal channel. You can see that it will add some stuff in there. Then we can adjust the intensity of that and the scale. That's gonna make it look more worn out. So I do think we have a little bit too much breakup now, which mostly comes from the details and the flakes, I guess. Put the flakes down, then the details. We can tone everything that we did down by adding a black mask. Then we do add fill. Now we can control the strength of the details. Let's just slide that in slowly until we get something nice. Then let's also add a color contrast, color correct on top. Again, let's put this in a folder called adjustments. Pass through, apply to all channels. Let's call this roughness. Put this to rough. I'm gonna be messing with luminosity, the midtones. Try to get a little bit more shiny. And I think like that works quite well. So now that we have that done, let's go ahead and call this worn. Actually, let's start with metal. That's because when we look for metal, I want to see all the metals that we have. Might also be a better idea to start off with Trigon. When you look for like Trigon ladder, that won't just be showing the Trigon ladders, but also the Trigon base ladders. But for now, let's just keep on going with this naming convention. Let's call this metal 1 Trigon. Right click, create smart material. Now you can see we have a metal 1 Trigon. So again, next time I'm going to texture, I'm going to look for Trigon. And you'll see that I have 3 smart materials ready to go. And that's going to be it for this section of creating smart materials and using them. So now that we finished with all our material work, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about using our baked maps to add some detail and depth and extra like push to the textures. I'm gonna take this, group it together. Let's call this materials. Then we're going to be creating a new HSL. let's group this and call this baked. Actually, let's call this effects. Let's call this one AO. Then we're gonna make this darker. Gonna have to set this to pass through, apply to all channels. Now we can darken everything. Now I'm gonna say add black mask, fill. Now if we go to project, we can see our baked maps. We're gonna take the ambient occlusion, which stands for AO, drop that in here. Let's check that out. And then lastly, we want to go ahead and do a levels and invert that. So now everything that has like a shadow of a high poly is going to be a little bit darker, which can add some nice looking depth to the textures. For example, take a look right here. How much more depth we're getting with the AO instead of not having that AO on top. Go ahead and up the saturation a little bit darker. Take a look at the color, see what that's doing, and that's looking pretty nice. So we're gonna do the same with the curvature. I'm gonna add a fill layer. Let's call this curve, short for curvature. Alt click color and roughness. I'm gonna add the curvature in the fill. Let's get the color back. So I'm gonna add those in the fill. Then we go to base color. Let's set this to overlay. Take a look at the base color. Now you can see that we're getting some of the details that we sculpted in ZBrush into our base color. We want to keep this nice and subtle. We can put something like 27. You can see it will just add a little bit of that depth into it, which is very nice. Now if we go roughness, let's say apply to all channels. Now if we go to the roughness, let's go ahead and adjust the strength of that. Let's do something like 29. This is just gonna add a little bit of depth and sharpness to your edges. If we disable the group, we can see what it's doing. And then lastly, we're gonna add a sharpen on top of this. So let's go filter, sharpen. We're gonna sharpen our textures up a little bit. I want to keep this nice and subtle so it doesn't become just a big noise. Let's go with 0.25. Take a look at the color. See how everything becomes a little bit sharper looking. Take a look at the roughness. Everything becomes a bit sharper. And we'll do the same for the metal, but we don't really need it in the metal. So we can disable and enable it, and you'll see it will just add a little bit of that extra, like nice effect to our textures. Now that we have our materials and effects set up, we need to do one more thing to blend all the materials a little bit nicer together and give it some more realism. That's going to be adding some wear and tear and environmental storytelling. So what does that mean? We add a layer. Let's say this is a leather belt that's being used by a Viking. He went through battle, so you'd probably expect to see some blood on his clothes. So now we can just add some red. Adjust the roughness. Let's go with like a dry blood. Let's go with a deeper, darker red. Let's create a group. This should be under the effects layer. I like to call this group environmental wear. Let's group this fill layer. Let's call this blood. Add black mask. Now let's talk a little bit. Actually, before we do that, let's just do a fill. Let's go to textures. Let's look for a nice one. And a pretty nice one for this would be the moisture. And add the moisture, alt click this. Again, try planar so it blends with the seams. Just tiling. Up the contrast. Add some breakup. Fill. We just add another moisture. And let's put this to multiply. We're gonna actually add one more fill. Again, multiply, just so we can take away a little bit more. So now you can see that there's some blood on here. It's nice and subtle, as it should be. Maybe we can add another blood that's less subtle. So at this point we can group the blood together. Let's call this blood. Call this one blood general. And let's make this one a little bit more general. Down the contrast of all this. That's going to be our general blood. Duplicate this. Call this blood platters. Get rid of this mask. Do a fill. We can go with something like dirt too. Just want some blood splatters. Also make this one a little bit different in color. Maybe a little more shiny. So now we have some blood on our belt. Again, you want to keep this pretty nice and subtle usually. Though I do think we can pump this up a little bit. So we can go ahead and put the levels on top of this and we can just push the whites. Maybe go with something like this. I think this looks pretty nice. This spot's maybe a little bit too prominent. So we can go blood general, we can do paint. We can start to paint away a little bit. We can go to paint. Dirt is a pretty nice one, dirt 1, it's nice and subtle. Hit X to switch the color to black. We're just gonna be painting, maybe that's too much. Let's go with a more gray value. Paint a little bit away. Paint a little bit with it. Go to black. Start painting that away a little bit. Now you can see we have a very subtle spot that we can just kind of get rid of. Then now the blood is looking pretty nice, but everything's the same red. So what we can do, we can go filter, HSL on top, the lightness, maybe the saturation. Maybe put that down a little bit. Black mask, fill, and add the clouds. Just gonna put that to triplanar, up the contrast, adjust the tiling. Let's go ahead and put that contrast down again, put the balance down. Now we have some variation in the color of our blood. Okay, quickly add more variation by just duplicating this. Let's call this variation 01, duplicate it. Now all that we need to do is just rotate it a little bit. Now adjust the value. Group this together, pass through. Let's call this variation. So you can see it's basically the same principles building up that smart material. Now we're doing it for blood. You can go roughness and add a filter. Contrast luminance, roughness, and let's adjust that a little bit. And have to apply to all channels. Let's make this a nice rough blood. So just like that. And I'm sure you can already see it coming. So we can take the blood. Let's add blood underscore Trigon. You can say create smart material. You will see now that we have a Trigon blood smart material. This is what I was talking about earlier. When you do have a mask, you can see that it will be black with just some spots on top where the mask is, which in this case is a nice thing, as it's supposed to be like blood splatters. So even when we're doing like environmental wear, I would still go like smart materials. And I'd look for my materials, Trigon. Then I'd have here like dust, sand, blood, and whatever, mud, and so on. Anything that you can think about. So by adding blood, we're not only making the textures, for example, look more interesting, but we're also telling a story. Right now, this leather belt is clearly being used by someone that went through a battle or whatever. It's something where people got hurt, which tells a story. Now let's add one more. Let's add a really quick and simple dust wear. So we have another way of creating masks. We don't need to do it manually every time with add black mask and fill and create blah 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 blah. We can use smart masks. Of these you can also make your own presets, by the way. But for now, let's just stick to the default ones. We're gonna look for dust. So over here we can see some masks. We can look for one that we like. Let's try dust subtle. Put that on, see how that looks. I don't like how that looks. Let's take it off. Maybe we can try sand dust. We're just gonna be looking for one that we like. I think this one looks pretty cool. Let's go with that. Let's give this like a bluish color to complement like the reddish tones that we have going on. This is very rough. Let's make it very rough. Definitely think it's too strong. So we can go to mask editor. We can put the global balance down to get a little bit less. Although I think this was looking more interesting, so we can keep it like that. Then we can add a fill on top, put this to multiply. Then we can control the strength of that mask. Because again, we're multiplying black on top of the whites. Maybe something like this. We can do a second dust. Maybe one on the edges, that's pretty nice. Like that's not bad. Let's go a little bit lower perhaps. Maybe something like this. Although I think we need some breakup. So on top of our smart mask, we can go again, fill. Let's get like a clouds. Put this to multiply. Try planar projection. Let's mess with the settings. I want to be taking stuff away. Go for bigger tiling. Maybe this one can be a more like whitish color. Go ahead and group all the dust together into our dust group. Add the black mask, add a fill. Now we can control the strength of our dust. Something subtle. Let's do the same for the blood. Add the black mask, add fill. Now we can control the strength of our blood. Let's go with something like this. Now we're pretty much done with the environmental wear. But I want to show you one more thing to add like some more wear to this. Whenever we have a material that's composed out of multiple materials, for example our leather, we have the top layer and the bottom layer. We can go to the top layer. We can add some black to this. And the easiest way to do that is to group it. Let's call this top layer. Then Ctrl-Alt-V to copy that mask. Ctrl-Alt-V to paste it. Now we're gonna add a black mask. So now we don't see anything. So let's undo a little bit. Let's go to hide. We need to replace the new top layer. Now on top layer, let's add wear mask. Let's add a black mask. So what we can do now is we can use smart masks and we can, for example, say fabric edges and drop that in here. Now you can see we get a pretty interesting mask. We need to invert this mask. Now if we adjust this, let's up the global balance. You can see that it will start to show the layer underneath. You can keep this nice and subtle. Maybe up the contrast a little bit. Now, for example, you can see that we're starting to get some nice wear around the edges. We disable that mask. You can see this looks a little bit boring. Now we have some nice wear. Getting some wear around the cracks, and that's because of the curvature map. So by blending your materials, you can add some quick looking breakup and damage. For example, we could add a fill on top of this. Let's look for scratches. I think we need to set it to subtract. Now we can have some scratches on our material. And at any time we can adjust the balance of the scratches. Scratch tiling to get more smaller scratches and whatever. I think the default settings work pretty well, so let's keep it like that. So let's say we're all happy with our textures, we save, the next day we open it up, we think, okay, I like it, but maybe it's a little bit too saturated. So what we can do is we can go, let's say, okay, our ladder is too saturated, let's go to our ladder and look in the ladder and, okay, ladder, blah, 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 topware, ladder Trigon, adjustment, we can add a HSL. Or if we say, okay, I like it, but all the textures are a bit too saturated. On top of the effects, just go adjustments, HSL. There's something that I use quite a lot after like I'm finished with my textures. Just add like a quick HSL all the way on top. I just mess a little bit with the saturation of things, the lightness, and see if I can get something that looks a little bit like nicer than what I had originally. As it's just a quick way to like try to push your textures. For example, I do think I overdid the saturation a little bit. I liked a little bit better with a lower saturation. Group this and call this adjustments. You can do the same for the call this color. You can do the same for the roughness. Alt click that and let's mess around a little bit with that. First we need to set this to pass through, apply to all channels. So on the roughness we can say, okay, let's try to make it look more shiny, less shiny. Now what, maybe we make it a little bit more shiny. So something like this. So even if you finished all your texturing, you can still try to kind of push it in whatever direction you want. It's done by adding some quick adjustments with filters. By just taking a second to do this, you usually get a nice looking texture. So I'm just kind of looking, and I think we're pretty much ready. I think we can call this one done. So now let's go ahead and save our project. Ctrl S as in save. And then to export we can say Ctrl Shift E as in export. Or we can go File, Export Textures. Now we have a whole bunch of settings. Again, if you're gonna be working on a game, you should probably be putting like an Unreal Engine template, just so everything gets packed nicely together. For rendering, we can just keep it at metallic roughness. But my preferred one that I usually go with, if I'm just gonna do a render, is document channels plus normal plus AO. No alpha with alpha, depending if you have opacity. Let's just go with no alpha. PNG is pretty nice. Put it to 16 bits. This means that you get a bigger file size, but more like information in your pixels, like a further range. It's just gonna make it look nice. And again, if we're texturing, we want it to look as nice as possible. Now size, even if you were texturing at, let's say 1K, we can still export at 4K. Anytime we change the resolution, the layer stack, this is the layer stack, will be calculated again and will be true for K. So lastly, build MTL, that's going to be the name of our textures. If you're not happy with that name, we can say save settings, texture set list. Let's change this to belt. So let's go with leather belt. Ctrl Shift E, it's an export. Now we see leather belt. Now all that we have to set an output directory. Select this, let's create a new folder, all this textures. And select folder. Now we're gonna export them. Save settings. Now you've officially finished your textures and you can use them in Marmoset or any other software to render. You can take a quick look at the textures. Also, we can get rid of the leather belt normal. We don't need that. We need the leather belt normal OpenGL. So now as you can see, now we have our textures all ready and done. So I hope you enjoyed this chapter. This is going to be the most important chapter in the course, because this is going to be your base, like your building blocks. This is the base that you need to work in Substance Painter. If you can master these techniques, you can pretty much texture anything and everything that you want. And from that point on, you can start like looking at more techniques and more stuff that you like to keep adding to that workflow. But for me, this is a very strong foundation that you can use to texture anything that you would like. And depending on the time that you see this course, this might be the final chapter. Or if we're a little bit further in the future, there's going to be chapters with more advanced techniques and ways to improve your workflow and to accomplish more complicated materials and better textures.